So we are getting a Beatles directed film by Sam Mendes. This is going to be coming out in April of 2027. Apparently all 4 parts are going to come out in the same month. It's unsure if we're going to get them week to week in April or if they're all going to drop at one time. Essentially what I wanted to do is, I am the biggest Beatles fan. Like, I love the Beatles. They're my favorite band. I've seen Paul and Ringo in concert before. Like, I am obsessed with their music. I've listened to all their albums. I have so many of their albums on vinyl. Like, I just wanted to kind of talk about, like, what I want from this movie, which we are going to get starring. It is going to be, I believe, I can't always tell these actors apart. Right here is Harris Dickinson, Paul Mescal, Barry Keoghan, and then Joseph Quinn is the far one, George Harrison in this. What I wanted to like talk about, because I have like a lot of anxieties about this movie. Like, I am not a huge Sam Mendes fan. With that said, I've also liked a handful of Sam Mendes films, and I kind of like this experimental thing that he's doing, where it's just like, we're going to make all 4 of these kind of back to back. They're all going to release at the same time. I think of a film earlier this year that had or I guess last year, that had a similar strategy, which was Horizon Part 1 and Part 2. And like, obviously we knew how that happens, but like, what is this going to be? I think this has a lot more commercial accessibility than something like Horizon had. But again, I just want to essentially, right here, this would be how I would make the Beatles movie. And I get I'm not Sam Mendes. I get I don't know what I'm doing. But here would be my pitch and how I would want to do it. So essentially, we know these are going to be 4 films. We're assuming that it's going to be focusing on each Beatle. I don't think we're going to get like Beatles in this and then Beatles in that and then Beatles in that. Like, it's going to be like, no, this one's going to be focused on Ringo as the main character. This one's going to be focused on Paul as the main character. Like, I don't think it's just going to be like 4 films with the Beatles doing like different kind of things and like everyone's a co-star in one another's films. Like, I think there are going to be like main actor focus, and then they're the supporting, and then they switch roles. There could be a chance that it's like the same event, just 4 different POVs. We'll talk about why I'm like skeptical of that, but let's just start with my pitch. So the first film would be starring Barry Keoghan as Ringo Starr. And I know a lot of people are like, you cannot launch a Beatles film or these 4 films with Ringo. And my answer is, 1, I think Barry Keoghan is probably the biggest star of these 4s. Now, maybe Joseph Quinn gets the boost with Fantastic Four coming out. Like, so maybe he could rise, or maybe Paul Mescal gets a few more breaks before 2027. But here's my pitch. I essentially kind of see Ringo allowing the audience to have the outside looking into the Beatles. Essentially, how I would start this story is it would be kind of where Ringo starts his story with the Beatles, is because the Beatles had their drummer before, they end up kicking him out, and they bring in Ringo Starr. So he would be kind of introduced to this core group of people who are already familiar with him, and he is the outsider coming in, establishing the relationships with Paul, with John, with George. And that would be what the audience is doing in many ways. Like, the audience is establishing these relationships with these characters for the first time. And I think Ringo lends itself to that very naturally. So as I see it, it is kind of the introduction of Ringo joining the band and that band becoming a sensation, that band lifting off and this friendship uniting and these 4 guys being there for one another. That is where I would kind of end part 1, which would then bring me to part 2, which this is the next one, which would be Harris Dickinson focused as John Lennon. And essentially what I want to make sure this movie or these series of movies aren't doing is I don't want to just do the greatest hits of the Beatles. I don't want to be like, well, John is going to just focus on the Yoko Ono and his eventual death and his like struggle with the band at the end. Like, we already have that incredible Peter Jackson documentary, Get Back. Like, I don't need to see that story again played out. What I would want to see is some of that disillusionment then come. I want to see kind of like where this all kind of like starts souring for John Lennon. So I picture this is the period where they stop going on concerts. They travel to India. They make Sgt. Pepper's. they make Magical Mystery Tour, like this era, like the Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour. Like that's what I kind of want to see with them. I think John is often in many ways considered one of the more artistically minded people within it. I think George also has that label around him. But I want to see essentially the cynicism grow within John at this moment. And we get to spend time with him because otherwise I think John, we get to the struggle of, we kind of get to the biography of him. We know who he is. We know we've seen this documented. And that's also going to be a struggle for Sam Mendes because we've seen these stories documented. Like we know the oral histories of the Beatles at this time. I think allowing this to be focused on John free Yoko allows us to essentially like let that chapter speak for itself. Like we've seen it so documented before. Let's see the period right before that then leads to him having this dissatisfaction, having these infighting with the band, forming this relationship with Ono, which can be focused on in another movie. So that's why I want John Lennon here. So right now it's Ringo and then John, which brings me to the third movie on my list, which would be the third movie I would have released is a Joseph Quinn-led movie as George Harrison. So the first movie we talk about, it is the introduction to these characters. It is the rise of fame. John Lennon's arc of this movie is going to be, in the second one, it's going to be like him becoming like disillusioned by that fame, him and the band traveling, becoming really experimental, becoming the Beatles that kind of become like defining artists of their generation and like really just become so renowned for the sound that they are creating and the way that they make those albums. Part 3 would be kind of a continuation and on that with George Harrison, who I think is often considered the artist, like the real unsung hero of the Beatles. His stuff, his story is so beautiful. And as I picture this, again, this isn't a story in my mind that needs to really focus on this Get Back period. Like, I don't really need to see the breakup of the Beatles. It's so public. We all know this story. What I would want to see this is kind of the right after they release the album, after they've kind of like dissolved and the Beatles are no more. And I think George Harrison is the most interesting of these characters because obviously we have the album All Things Must Pass. Like we get to now really focus, and I might have gotten that name of the George Harrison album wrong. Like I'm now All Things Will Pass, whatever that album is, you all know it. Like that's where we get to focus on George Harrison, like developing himself independently. You can still get a lot of the other Beatles, but of course George Harrison has like this real struggle with the Beatles at this time. Like he's a little distance from all of them. And I think this would just allow us to just focus more internally. I think this is the one that can really just allow Joseph Quinn as George Harrison. I think this is the most intimate movie that we could get, the career post. And I know a lot of people would be like, well, wouldn't it be more fun to see Paul McCartney like with Wings or John Lennon? Again, these are so famous that I think George Harrison is actually the most introspective artist at that time. So I think that's the natural grounding point. And then we get to the finale, which is Paul Mescal as Paul McCartney. I think this is the fireworks. This is where you end it all, which is essentially, I kind of want to see what, and I think it's what Paul Mescal does so well, the tragedy, the grieving, like the pain. And essentially, like I said, I don't need to see John Lennon killed on screen. Like, I just don't need to see that scene recreated. That's, again, one of my fears of these movies is we're just going to get the greatest hits and, like, the big moments that everyone knows. And I just don't need to see John Lennon murdered on screen. It's just my personal opinion. I don't need to see it. What I would like to see is a film, and it doesn't even need to necessarily be absent of Harris Dickinson as John Lennon, but it's the aftermath. It is these three characters, the survivors, George Harrison, Ringo Starr, Paul McCartney. They're all kind of just coming together after the death of John Lennon, after the death of their friend who means so much to them, who obviously helped cement their fame. And like that pain that comes from the artistic sensibilities that come, how they deal with this death of their friend who died so young and tragically. how they express that as artists, how they express that as people, how they in some ways rekindle old friendships, like have this retrospect. I think that is more emotionally rewarding than just like us being like, oh, John Lennon's the end, he gets killed. Like we all know, like they all come together, they're all at the funeral. Like I don't really want that. I want the maybe a year or two after it where it's just like, hey, these guys now have this like unspoken connection, not only through their time as the Beatles, but also in this tragedy and pain they're experiencing. How does that ferment in them? How does that change them as artists and as people? And then like with distance, how do they then go back and are able to look at their catalog, the Beatles catalog, and essentially like kind of have peace with it and like move forward? I think that's an emotionally interesting movie. That's kind of my pitch for this Beatles movie, which is that's what I want to see. I don't want to see the greatest hits. I don't need to see them playing in a bar in the first time in Germany and like getting discovered. I don't need to see them going on the Ed Sullivan show. Like I don't need to see them like tripping acid with Bob Dylan. Like we know all of these moments. Like sure, get them in there because I know you obviously have to have moments of it, but I don't want the whole story just being like, hey, this is what you already know. I want to just like have a little bit more artistic integrity in them. And I think each of these that I've laid them out, I think achieves that. I think it is able to actually capture what is most interesting to me at those times for each of these characters. You get to have Ringo introducing, learning all of these guys. You get to have John Lennon become a little dissatisfied, seek away from fame, really discover himself as an artist. You get to have George Harrison living with a little bit of annoyance and content for his fame and the solo career that they all then have. And then you get to have Paul McCartney dealing with grief. Like you get to have these moments and it all allows these characters to be tied in. It keeps, I think, the idea and spirit of these people and their actors. And I think also what I wanted to do was I wanted to focus on where would make for these actors to be utilized the best. Like when I think of it, I'm like, Ringo Starr is such a fun introduction character. Paul Mescal is that was emotionally devastating. Like George Harrison is like, oh, this is like really rich in its text and what it's trying to say about artists. And then Harris Dickinson, like you get to see like the kind of the arrogance in many ways of John Lennon. Like you get to see him like kind of like in many ways, I think some people associate him with being a little pretentious in this era or just becoming like really like crabby, or however you want to say it, like getting like really testy with people. Like I think Harris Dickinson can do that well. So that's my pitch for the Beatles. That's just one fan's opinion. But either way, April 2027, I just need to see what this movie is going to look like, and I can't wait to hear more details about it. So those are my thoughts on the Beatles movie directed by Sam Mendes. Sam, please, 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 I'm begging you. I hope you do a great job with this movie because if you can, this is going to be a movie that I will love. I promise you that. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more.